one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please be seated. Call of the roll. This House now resumes its sitting. May we have the call of the roll, Miss?
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Miss Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawi Ford, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Terry Long, Miss Smith, Mr. Main, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Finn, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Davis, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Miss Crawford, Miss Staley, Miss Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Miss Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Miss Lee, Mr. Miller, Miss Morrison, Miss Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright.
Members, as you're all aware, there have been discussions taking place in the public space against violence, and in particular, the reference to domestic violence. As women in Parliament, we are dedicated to leadership in our country, and we are committed to the promotion of a safer, gentler, and more peaceful Jamaica, in which every person can live free from fear, and in which mutual respect and love are practiced among our people. This, therefore, in the is a joint statement where, as women in Parliament, we continue to denounce domestic violence in all its forms and regardless of who the perpetrators are or may be. As members of the highest legislative body in this land, we have always committed to ensure that the rights of every individual in Jamaica are protected. We also continue to conduct the business of our country respectful of the laws that govern us. As such, we seek to guarantee life, well-being, and the happiness of each and every individual. In relation to violence, and in particular, gender-based violence, this must at all times be denounced as a threat to life, a threat to the well-being and the happiness of our people. We have never, and this Parliament will never condone violence in any form. And in particular, domestic violence, gender-based violence. It is for this reason that as women leaders in Parliament, together we feel the urge at this time to come together in solidarity with our sisters or women who are in the line of fire from the lethal forces of domestic violence, most often meted out to them by men who may be their intimate partners, their co-workers, their family members, or simply community members. We are aware that domestic violence is not relegated to the vicious physical assault often displayed and spread among our social media platforms, as horrible as they are. Domestic violence also includes verbal, psychological, cultural, and social abuse. It is for this reason, members, that we continue to support a national conversation with actions to deal with the reality of gender-based violence, as stated in the National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence. We call for all hands on deck. Our homes, our political parties, our political organizations, our churches, the media, or schools, or service clubs, or youth organizations, the cultural sector, and every single person in this country that can lend support to this. We appeal to the media and faith-based organizations for the promotion of positive values in relation to the definition of maleness, insofar as that definition affects the relationship with our women. We must eliminate the toxic masculinity that often expresses itself in violence against women. We express solidarity with our sisters who find themselves in these violent circumstances. We beg you, our sisters, not to be ashamed, but to seek support from any source that you are comfortable with and that you trust. For too long, some of these women are silent and blame themselves for the negative behavior of some of our men. Too often, we unwittingly support their toxic masculinity. As mothers, grandmothers, aunts, church sisters, we must commit to change in how we grow our boys and our girls so that we can put an end to this scourge in our nation. We must use every single avenue, every relevant government institution and instrument, including by reinforcement through education and culture programs and the involvement in all sectors and individuals that have influence over the construction of the thought processes of our people. Ultimately, members, it is our hope that as we all take responsibility for how we see each other as a people, we may espouse the need to be our sisters' keepers, even as we seek to promote the well-being and happiness of all. It is about speaking up for positive and harmonious interactions among our people. It is about admitting to and organizing against negative stereotypes perpetuated in regard to both men and boys who are often presented as aggressive and violent, and towards women and girls who are seen as weaker, submissive, always ready to accept whatever is meted out to them by our men. This is a conversation that must happen. It must also, as women together in Parliament, we say, be supported by action, and strong action. We all bear responsibility to change our reality. And as leaders, as women in Parliament, we feel that we cannot continue to simply speak. We must act. We must say to the public, this is not business as usual. We are taking action, as we must do, and we will do. Members, in relation to this conversation, in relation to the matters and the ruling I made last week, I am here to report to this Parliament and to Jamaica and to the world at large that I can report that the Member of Parliament for Central Westmoreland is proceeding on a leave of absence from this Parliament. I can also report further that I have been advised by the Leader of the House that the said Member of Parliament for Central Westmoreland will no longer sit in the JLP government caucus, and as such, he will not be under the control of the government's whip. This, members, is action that has been taken in addition to whatever else may happen. Thank you.
Madam Speaker. Okay. Okay.
Madam Speaker, I wish to thank you for your statement on behalf of the Parliament and to join you, Madam Speaker, in expressing the outrage of the Parliament at what we had seen and to condemn unequivocally violence against women, violence against our children, and violence generally in our society. Madam Speaker, like all well-thinking Jamaicans who saw the viral video circulated, I was outraged at the display of violence. Subsequent allegations that a person captured in the video is a member of Parliament placed a new disturbing dimension to the issue. While every citizen, every community leader, every civic leader, every civic organization, every national organization, every one of us have a duty and must play their part and speak loudly and unequivocally against violence. We who sit in this honorable House, elected and appointed to make laws, policies, and indeed the budget for the people, have a higher duty to exemplify the laws of the land and the policies which we espouse and advocate. If we are not seen as exemplifying the law and believing in what we preach, our electorate and the wider society will not take us seriously. And worse, they will not trust us. This in an already low trust environment. The allegations made against the member, though unproven, are serious and have cast unresolved doubt which could impact the government's credibility in pursuing our long-established anti-violence strategies and policies, particularly as it relates to gender-based violence. Madam Speaker, the office I hold as Prime Minister is a creature of procedure and process. I am not at large to act and say as others appear to be. I am bounded by process and procedure. And in all instances where I've been called upon, that's how I've acted. Gone through a process to establish natural justice, what is fair, what is right, what is legal, and then we have acted. I have never used process as an excuse for action, however, Madam Speaker. And there is, within this debate, a need for our public, in as much as we are outraged, and in as much as we must express condemnation, and in as much the protests and demonstrations that we are seeing a legitimate part of our democracy in expressing our anger and outrage, at the same time, we cannot escape. The leader of the opposition is also an officer of the court. So he, more than most, would understand and appreciate process and procedure. If it is that it is understood, but yet the path is still pursued, then we can only say it is a political motivation. And this issue, Madam Speaker, affects both sides of the aisle. It is not a political issue. And if we continue to pursue it as a political issue, leader of the opposition, we will also lose the trust of the people. Which is why it is best, because this is an issue that is affecting the entire House. And we must speak with one clear, unequivocal, unambiguous voice on this matter. But it must be strong. Whenever matters that require action have challenged this administration, more than any other administration, we have acted. We have taken action. There has been consequence. We have never hidden anything, brushed anything under the carpet. We have acted. And we have done it within the boundaries of the law and what is administratively possible. Even where we can't get legal action, Madam Speaker, we have taken administrative action. And whenever anything is within my discretion as Prime Minister, I have used that discretion to set tone and example. Madam Speaker, you have outlined that the member in question is now separate from the government caucus and has taken a leave of absence from this House. It is time that should be used well to resolve doubts and questions. What must be patently clear to the public is that the government does not want its credibility and leadership of the cultural and social revolution that is necessary in rejecting the use of violence as a means of resolving conflict to be impaired. While there are those who would want to see more action, and in instances justifiably so, that would symbolize severe punishment, I'm sure that on reflection we recognize that we can only go as far as the law allows us. As parliamentarians, we make the law, and so we also have a duty to look at the law and determine whether or not the law goes far enough. Madam Speaker, I have been speaking about the scourge of violence on our society long before this level of public attention on the issue is what it is. Long before. I've been speaking about it, Madam Speaker, when it was not popular. even within my own political organization. So you will understand, Madam Speaker, my own grave concern that what has happened could indeed impair what it is that we have started in addressing the issue. And Madam Speaker, you know, while I'm upset and terribly disappointed that we are faced with this situation, I also see it as an opportunity to advance the government's policy in this regard and to spread the message wider and louder to the producers, perpetrators, and apologists for violence in our country. Madam Speaker, our society has evolved over the last 2 decades significantly, and we now have a critical mass of Jamaicans. Maybe it's generational, maybe it's the exposure to social media, you know, maybe it's the internet and cable, maybe it's increased travel, but we now have a critical mass of Jamaicans who are impatient of some of our cultural tendencies and practices. That for some of us, we find it very difficult to relieve ourselves of, and others, Madam Speaker, don't even know that these practices are dangerous, damaging, and hurtful. We in this House, by our statements today and our posture, we have the opportunity to reach out to those persons who have not yet heard the message that the time is nigh, that it will no longer be talking about it, action will be taken about it. Madam Speaker, the issue of gender-based violence has been a subject of public outrage, and rightly so. This is an issue that has plagued our society for far too long. According to recent statistics, 28% of women in Jamaica experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. 28%. In 2018, 71% of girls under 18 who were victims of crime had been raped. 2 out of 10 girls aged 15 to 19 years old think it is okay for a husband or a partner to hit his or her husband or partner to hit his wife or partner. And 85% of children experience violent discipline at home. So you see the nature of violence in our society. It is widespread. This level of widespread violence could only exist if there wasn't social acceptance and institutional reinforcement. That's the only way it could exist. Our job is to make it clear that regardless of what the culture is, the institution of the country does not support it, and therefore institution must act to change culture. Violence against women and girls is not just a tragedy for the victims. It represents a wider societal failure. Gender-based violence is also a major obstacle to achieving equality between women and men. Madam Speaker, we are moving beyond condemnation to concrete actions against the scourge of violence. Studies show that violence is greatest in societies where the use of violence in any situation is socially acceptable and treated as the norm. Therefore, in speaking out against violence, we can create a new culture that is intolerant of all forms of violence in our homes, in our institutions, in our workplaces, in our communities, in our music, in our schools, and most certainly in our parliament. This issue affects everyone. It affects the rich, it affects the poor, it affects the educated, it affects the unschooled. It affects individuals, families, and communities. It affects people in every walk of life and in every profession, including ours. Madam Speaker, this is an issue on which we have been taking action. We have been working to bring an end to gender-based violence through legislative, policy, and programmatic actions that protect victims of violence and bring perpetrators to justice. We are working towards building a culture in which there is no gender-based violence. In December 2017, we launched a 10-year National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence, and in 2018, we launched the first public education campaign titled No Excuse for Abuse. Madam Speaker, we can't be investing this level of time, effort, legislative and policy for it not to have the effect, because the people who we are targeting the message to can point on us and say, but you're not leading by example. Because ultimately, as I'm sure my friends across the aisle will agree, that the true expression of government power and authority is not the ability to coerce forcefully. It is the ability to get people to comply willingly and voluntarily. And the only way to get to that level of government is by building trust, by being legitimate and having credibility. So, Madam Speaker, I don't want anybody to believe that this administration is somehow trying to hide what has happened or not happened, or trying to walk around the issue. We well understand the time in which this administration exists, and we well understand the expectations of the people who elected us, and even those who didn't vote for us. We understand it, and we intend to be true to the dreams and aspirations of the Jamaican citizens who want to see a level of governance that they can say, I am proud to be Jamaican. It is a pathway. It is a journey. But we are strong journeymen committed to attaining that goal. Along with UN Women, we have been building out an island-wide social media campaign to increase the protection of women and girls. At the same time, we are engaging men and boys as key partners in the ongoing program to provide empowerment. We have also made significant national budgetary allocations for the construction of nationally owned and operated shelters for abused women and their children. One of these centers was opened in October 2020. In March 2020, we launched the Spotlight Initiative Country Program for Jamaica in collaboration with the European Union and the United Nations. The Spotlight Initiative is a multi-year global initiative focused on eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls. As its name suggests, it is meant to focus attention on this issue, moving it into the spotlight and placing it at the center of efforts to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment. For too long, we have spoken about this topic in hushed tones. The days of impunity and silence on this issue are over. The Spotlight Initiative in Jamaica is a 3-year program costing US $10.9 million and contribute to transforming the society into one where women and girls can live free from family violence. The initiative will focus on addressing the issue of normalization of violence in Jamaica, while the initiative takes women and girls, while it takes a women and girls-centered approach. But efforts are also being undertaken within the initiative to engage men and boys to address this issue, as you have pointed out in your presentation, Madam Speaker, this issue of toxic masculinity. Madam Speaker, it is one of these new catchphrases that is used, toxic masculinity. And there are many men listening to this and wondering, what does it mean? Obviously, they understand what toxic means. They may not all have a concept of what masculinity should be. I mean, they understand within the social context what it means to be a man. But, Madam Speaker, you know, many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I overheard a conversation in an office that I went to. And two ladies were talking, and one was pointing out that on her way to work, a man hit her car, and the man came out, looked at her fancy car, expensive car, looked at his car, and said, "What you do driving? Why you not the woman at the kitchen? Look what you make happen." Madam Speaker, there are many men who think like that. For the women who have been raped and abused, the question is, so what did you do to make this happen? What kind of clothes were you wearing? This is what we mean when we say toxic masculinity. And this is what we have to change in how we as men think. I am not expecting that with this speech, or what the leader of the opposition may say, that immediately all the men in our society are going to change the way in which they think. But by using today as a watershed, we can start that journey of changing the way in which some of our men think. The program, Spotlight Initiative, is being implemented at a time when widespread crime and violence against women and girls continue to affect families and communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has worsened an already bad situation. Around the world, there is a 30% increase in reports of violence against women. In Jamaica, more than 700 new cases were reported to the Victim Support Unit in March and April 2020 alone when compared to the previous months. While the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted implementation of the Spotlight Initiative, there was meaningful progress nevertheless. During 2020, the government initiated a process for a comprehensive review of the Sexual Offences Act, Offences Against the Persons Act, Domestic Violence and Child Care and Protection Acts. The Spotlight Initiative has been a partner in this legislative review process by facilitating multi-sectoral dialogue. A partnership between Spotlight and the Bureau of Gender Affairs was established in 2020 to strengthen the capacity of the Bureau to review and implement the National Strategic Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence and the National Policy for Gender Equality. A media campaign was launched aimed at encouraging children, parents, and communities to get involved and take action against incidents of violence against girls. 2 public service announcements promoting the national reporting mechanisms for children abuse generated over 74 million impressions on traditional and social media. On April 14, 2021, the Spotlight Initiative National Steering Committee approved the 2021 work plan. This year, the initiative will focus on the training of nurses, police officers, justice system personnel, and other frontline workers in understanding gender-based violence. It will expand domestic violence intervention centers attached to police stations across the island. It will strengthen local coordination networks that support survivors of violence and abuse, and supporting the establishment of national shelters for survivors of gender-based violence and their dependents, and educating parents and men to explore beliefs and attitudes towards gender-based violence. Madam Speaker, another important initiative that the government has undertaken is the Pathfinder program. In 2016, the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children was created. As part of its remit to create accelerated action, the Global Partnership designated 15 pathfinding countries, each charged with the commitment of 3 to 5 years of fast-track action to reduce violence against children. Jamaica was one of the first countries designated as a pathfinding country in 2016. In 2018, a 5-year national plan for an integrated response to children and violence was launched. The plan represents a comprehensive response to treating with violence against children. Most Jamaican children have access to publicly funded education. However, the rates of student participation, attendance, progress, completion, and transition to secondary level education, especially among boys from economically disadvantaged communities, are concerning. Approximately 50,000 secondary school-age adolescents, of which 60% are boys, are out of school. Moreover, some 80% of Jamaican children are believed to experience form of violence in their homes and communities. Violence, whether it is at home, in the community, or school-based, can significantly impact the children's health, mental health, quality of life, and can be associated with lower academic achievement, compromising their ability to benefit fully from the educational opportunities given to them. At school, children are exposed to violence in various forms, including peer-to-peer violence, example, getting into physical fights and bullying, but they are also exposed to institutional violence, corporal punishment. Corporal punishment, Madam Speaker, is violence endorsed by the state. And that must come to an end. They are exposed to sexual harassment and assault, and almost all of them, almost all children in our schools are witnesses to violence. They see it on a daily basis. Teachers and administrators also experience violence in the school setting. In response to this situation, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information began implementing the school-wide positive behavior intervention and support framework. UNICEF has been supporting the ministry to contextualize, pilot, and scale up their framework in all primary and secondary schools. Minister, we have to get this scaled up rapidly. Already, 56 primary and secondary level schools are engaged in the program with some 30,000 children, 6,000 teachers. And this is being scaled up more and more every day. In 2021, UNICEF, in collaboration with the National College on Education Leadership, is developing a free-of-charge online professional development course for teachers that includes this framework as a module. UNICEF is also supporting the ministry to develop a monitoring and evaluation framework to finalize the National Safe Schools policy and the establishment of a Safer Schools website that will be used as an informational resource and a platform to generate buy-in for our school-wide positive behavior intervention support framework. Madam Speaker, I want to quickly mention the police, the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Madam Speaker, this government and previous governments have invested heavily in controlling how our security forces use force. Without question, the passage of Indicom and the actions thereafter would have had a significant impact on the culture of our police organizations. Without question, it is a perfect example of institution challenging culture. We are not always comfortable with the outcomes, and sometimes you hear the public saying that it can be an impediment to crime fighting. Again, we must act within the process, the procedure, and the law. That's just the reality as we change culture. My greatest pride is to see the reports of Indicom showing a decline in the number of police killings. It says something about our state and the use of force. It is not widely accepted in the society as yet, but we are getting there where the average Jamaican will get to the point where they accept that the use of force by our security forces must be the last resort. And so I believe we are on a good pathway, Madam Speaker, in controlling violence in our security forces. Because if the state is going to say to its citizens, do not use violence, don't beat up anybody, don't harass them, respect their personhood and the physical manifestation of the person with the body. If we're going to say that to them, then we must also ensure that the institutions of the state practice that as well. So it can't be that we are saying, children, when in a fight, don't beat up on one another. But then the teacher turn around and beat them. You know, we can't be saying, don't beat up your girlfriend. But the mother don't spare the cutlass in beating up the daughter or the son. Inconsistent. And we must reflect on this as a society. As a society, Madam Speaker, that has gone through slavery. I find it the greatest contradiction that we would hold on to this business of violence. In rejecting our history, of being enslaved. We should also reject the violence that came with it. So, Madam Speaker, the Jamaica Constabulary Force has also undertaken a review of their domestic violence intervention policy and protocols. Over 300 supervisors and managers have had domestic violence intervention training since 2020, with 168 in the last 3 months as they go through their development courses. This is in addition to the mandatory domestic violence module in place for all police recruits in basic training at the National Police College. A national coordination unit has been established within the Community Safety Branch that will capture data, ensure standardization, and interface with external partners. We are strengthening the existing processes and procedures for dealing with domestic violence and have instituted additional reporting and accountability measures. Each station commander is required to pay particular attention to domestic violence cases within their policing area and report daily to the Domestic Violence Intervention Liaison Officer within the division so that these reports can be appropriately monitored. 6 new domestic violence intervention centers will be opened this year in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme. Domestic violence intervention centers are hosted and managed by the JCF at select police stations where professional volunteers counsel persons involved in domestic conflict. The 4 existing centers at Constant Spring, Matilda's Corner, Morant Bay, and the Yallas Police Station saw over 1,500 referrals in 2020. And Madam Speaker, let me say here that some years ago there was an abduction of a young lady in a taxi. And we put in place some immediate responses, including a policy on tint for motor vehicles, for taxis. We examined an entire framework for preventative arrest, which we still are looking at, and we'll say some more on that. And, Madam Speaker, what you're seeing here with the deployment of these domestic violence intervention strategies within the force came as a result of these discussions. Madam Speaker, I received a call from a lady living somewhere in the Constant Spring area, and she complained about the Constant Spring police station, that she went there and the police was not as responsive to her as she would like. They told her it's man and woman business, go back home and make up with your husband. And Madam Speaker, the issue made its way to the National Security Council. I brought it. We had a long discussion on what to do and recognized that, you know, the police is a part of the society. The policemen have the same cultural exposure as everyone else. And so it's not that you can turn around and blame the police. The institution, the leadership of the police must put in place policies, because the police is a command and control organization. It is a professional body, so you have to set professional standards and put the framework in place to address it. In reading this today, Madam Speaker, I'm happy to see it, that it is materializing, but it took some time. And it might be another decade before this is now right across all police stations and all policemen understand how they should treat with domestic violence. But, Madam Speaker, we must start and we must enforce it, and not just put in place the policy, but we must monitor and evaluate it and hold persons accountable. I am confident that our police officers are going through this systematic change and systemic change within the organization. And that, as we have been seeing, that the police force is transforming daily before our very eyes. Transforming before our very eyes. Undoubtedly, there are the naysayers whose comments sometimes I wonder if it is that they are unhappy to see the police transforming. But regardless of those, we are happy, we are confident that we are taking the right measures to transform our police force. And this, Madam Speaker, is one of them. The 4 existing centers, Madam Speaker, saw over 1,500 referrals in 2020. People are using them, and they are making a difference. While increasing access to the domestic violence intervention centers and facilitators is important, it is critical for every police station to be a safe and welcoming space. We have a duty of care to provide protection to those seeking our help, and we must respond appropriately to all reports of domestic violence. We remain professional in doing so, and that the police refrain from making any judgmental references. Because, you know, Madam Speaker, sometimes the comments that are made can be even more egregious than the complaint you came to make. So we often hear the case of people going to the police station and then at the end of the complaint, you're asked for your number. Can I make a call to you? Can I give? Crazy. So we are addressing all of these issues, Madam Speaker, in our police force. Every day, police officers deal with domestic disputes, the majority of which are professionally handled and resolved. Where necessary, officers engage other stakeholders, such as the Bureau of Gender Affairs, Victim Support Unit, and the Dispute Resolution Foundation. It is important to note that in cases of physical domestic abuse, the victims are required to participate in the investigative and court processes in order for the matter to be settled. If at any stage of the proceedings the complainant or the victim decides not to pursue the matter, then the judicial process will be stymied. It is for this reason friends, relatives, and social services are critical to supporting the victim of domestic violence to get past stigma, embarrassment, and trauma and the economic risk as they pursue judicial recourse. Madam Speaker, this is one of the areas that the Parliament needs to look at carefully and determine whether or not our laws go far enough and offer enough protection. And it is an internal conversation. I'm certain that from my statement here, others will join the conversation. But it is something that the government is examining to see whether or not that could fit within our legal framework, our jurisprudence. Other countries that have a similar jurisprudence have provisions that allow domestic violence and abuse cases to be pursued even without the victim's own statement and participation. It's something that we will have to look at. And that is the role of the Parliament, and this is what the Parliament must do, and this is what we're going to examine. Madam Speaker, our message to victims of gender-based violence has always been to get out of the situation and make a report to the authorities. But we know from experience that some victims still stay in violent relationships for many reasons. One of them is that they simply don't have a place to go. This administration has worked very hard to change that situation. We now have a national shelter for women who need to leave abusive situations, and we are working to establish 2 other government-run facilities to be part of a network of safe places for victims of gender-based violence. I take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to call upon our private sector, to call upon our civil society, and indeed our diaspora, who is always connected to what is happening in Jamaica and who want to help, that a perfect way to assist in this social and cultural revolution that we are trying to stimulate and lead against violence is to give the victims the opportunity to leave the violent situation. So if we could start by complementing what the government is going to do through the national budget to develop more of these centers, we would be advancing on this journey. We thank the churches, gender activists, and other local and international partners who have been helping us to provide these safe places, and we ask for their continued and expanded support. I urge any woman or girl who needs help to leave a violent relationship to call us. The numbers are well publicized by Minister Grange, and in her presentation, I'm sure she will outline those numbers. And, Madam Speaker, the government has an obligation to assist. But we know that some women cannot call for help for a variety of reasons. That is why we continue to call upon family members, friends, and neighbors who know of a woman in distress to make an intervention and call for help on her behalf. I believe that in all cases of intimate partner abuse, someone, somewhere, knows or suspects what is happening, but has refused to say anything about it. We cannot continue to turn a blind eye. We must believe it is our duty to intervene. Madam Speaker, I believe that every perpetrator of gender-based violence should be punished. And I'm sure we also believe, as it is our Christian faith, that the opportunity for rehabilitation should also be provided. I do not believe that justice is served or that there is a deterrent when one victim gets out of the situation while the perpetrator, unpunished, goes on to abuse a second or a third or even a fourth victim. So we must put a stop to it by punishing, setting an example and drawing the line. But at the same time, you also prevent the third, fourth, fifth, second victim by rehabilitating. So the two things go together. We must prevent gender-based violence, and we must provide the best services for our victims. At the same time, effective punishment and rehabilitation of offenders must also be key parts of our plan to address gender-based violence. In that regard, we have been reviewing legislation that deals with gender-based violence to increase penalties for offences and provide greater protection for victims. Minister Grange will make a statement on the proposed legislative changes. Finally, Madam Speaker, it is important for us all to recognize that gender-based violence is but one manifestation of a much broader societal epidemic of violence that we are facing. The underlying causes of our violence, our epidemic of violence, are varied and deep-rooted. The National Commission on Violence Prevention will be, or has started, to examine all aspects of violence and ways to address it to ensure long-lasting solutions. The National Commission on Violence Prevention is reviewing the interventions that have been employed locally and internationally to identify what has worked, and we look forward to receiving the Commission's recommendations. Madam Speaker, before I close, just to point out, the government of Jamaica has several programs that have elements of intervention in violent situations. And we have many programs that are targeted at the vulnerable groups. The challenge we face as a government, I'm making a general statement here, which I will apply to a specific situation, is that there are many suggestions that are being made, many programs that are being promoted and advocated. Indeed, the government has a plethora of interventions. They are not aligned with each other. They have common threads, but the threads aren't networked. They are spending from the same budget, oftentimes spending on the same issue with fragmented management. And so the effectiveness of the government's intervention, when taken as a whole, is limited. And that is the challenge.
Paradise Plum, and keep it locked to PBCJ. This is your girl, Naomi Cowan.
Reduce your risk of viral illnesses like the flu and coronavirus. Wash your hands frequently with soap and water. Cover your nose and mouth when coughing with a tissue and dispose of it. Avoid close contact with anyone with the cold or flu-like symptoms. If you think you've been exposed to COVID-19, stay home. Self-isolate immediately and call 888-1-LOVE. That's 888-663-5683. A message from the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
From our talawaness. It will not take away from our assertiveness, but it will take away our incivility to each other. Yes. Our unjustness to each other, man to man. And oftentimes the savagery that we display. The inhumanity. Thank you for that word. That is the objective. So the Commission will place us on a pathway to achieve this. And what I wouldn't want, Madam Speaker, is for there to be a political divide on the issue of treating with violence. There must be a united voice. Madam Speaker, the Church must say the same thing that we are saying about violence. We must dig deep in Scripture to reinforce the inviolability of the person, whether you are a little person or a big person, whether you are a man or a woman, well, a boy and girl, but I really put it, the children are little people too. They have rights, and they don't have little rights and big rights. They have rights. Madam Speaker, the family, whatever your family is, must take the same approach that we are taking. Beating is not the only way to bring up your children. There are many countries, Madam Speaker, who have taken the deliberate approach, some of them 60 years ago. Study the case of Sweden. They passed a law to ban corporal punishment. Way up. And this notion that the only, the reason why you are successful is because you got beaten. It's a false notion. You know how many persons are not successful because they got beaten? These are the kinds of social norms that we must destroy and take out of the minds of our people. Madam Speaker, the community. Jamaica has a unique kind of community arrangement, We have this notion of an era leader, a community leader, a Don, that replaces the state, that dispenses justice and back to school items. But they also dispense violence. We must end that in this country. Madam Speaker, and the Parliament of the land must set the example. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I want to thank the women in Parliament for their joint statement today, which you read, extolling the need for the country to rally behind all it takes to end gender-based violence, domestic violence. And the Prime Minister, in his statement, has expanded that to include violence generally, and has said how important it is that all Jamaicans, well-thinking Jamaicans, join in the efforts to tame this monster of violence which is so ingrained in our society for historical and other reasons. And Prime Minister, I assure you that you will have our support in whatever efforts are brought to try and make Jamaica a more peaceful and loving society, because we all want to see that. Prime Minister, I agree with you that action is needed, and I must say I'm unhappy with the lack of action in certain respects. For example, there was a joint select committee chaired by Minister Grange that reviewed the Sexual Offences Act, the Child Care and Protection Act, the Offences Against the Person Act, and the Domestic Violence Act, and delivered a report. We met for well over a year. It was a long series of meetings. That report was finalized a year ago or more. And it made recommendations, and we haven't seen any of those recommendations brought to Parliament in the form of any modernizing of legislation to make it more effective. This is a kind of inaction that we need to change. We need to be more prompt and proactive in responding to real issues when they're identified. It was recognized at that Joint Select Committee that in relation to domestic and gender-based violence in particular, that was a very critical, complex, and broad subject that, because of the length of time that the committee had been working on all the other legislation, there wasn't really time to get to grips with it. And the recommendation was that another committee should be established to focus on that as a topic in its own right. And I hope that today we can establish that committee to start that work. I see no reason why we have to wait any longer to set up that committee that can start to look at why it is that our domestic violence legislation is largely ineffective in Jamaica. It was passed with the best of intentions, but the fact is that domestic violence is pervasive, and since COVID has been getting worse. And the law is one aspect of it, and the rules of evidence around how cases come to court and how they can be effectively prosecuted are important aspects of where change is needed and where other jurisdictions have tried various innovative things in the domestic violence sphere to make it easier for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. But it's not just law. There are the institutional underpinnings, some of which you referred to, Prime Minister, the safe places of safety for women who are being abused and so on. And of course, we welcome the plans to add, I think, 6 more this year of these domestic violence DVI centers, 4 of which exist now in various police stations. So action is not just talk. Action is getting things done. And that committee needs to be established right away. So look at this important topic and try to bring in the commission that you've established some years ago that has done some work on this. Bring them into the Joint Select Committee, hear what their ideas are, hear from other stakeholders with expertise to try and see what can be formulated to develop a plan, of which Parliament's role in that will be legislative, as the legislator of the land. Now, Prime Minister, what has triggered your statement today? It wasn't on the agenda, I noticed, but you came well prepared with a 10-page statement and copies, which is unusual. I thank you for the copies. But what has triggered it is, of course, the video that went viral and the allegation that the person seen in that video beating up a woman savagely was a member of Parliament. That has triggered action, we are told, within your party to distance themselves internally from that individual in the sense of stripping him from any party positions. And we're told within this Parliament you've decided that he won't be part of your caucus. But from our perspective, we think that the nation demands that Parliament do something about this situation, where one of its own, who has not denied that he's the person in the video, and all the action that has been taken in relation to him suggests that it is generally accepted that he is that person. We know that as it stands today, prosecution is unlikely, because as often happens in domestic violence cases, the 2 individuals involved have decided not to take it any further. There can be all sorts of reasons why that may happen. But from the point of view of Jamaica, in this epidemic of domestic and gender-based violence, the Parliament must show that it does not countenance or stand for such behavior. Now, Prime Minister, it does not satisfy me, and I dare say others, that the mechanism that is being proposed to deal with this matter is for the person involved to decide he wants to take a leave of absence and be granted that leave by the Speaker. That cannot be how the Parliament responds to this issue. It can't be the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator's decision as to how it should be addressed. And this is why the motion that we tabled last week will be retabled today with some amendments. Because we believe the member should be suspended, and the Ethics Committee should consider the matter and report back to the House as to what is appropriate. And you know, Prime Minister, you said a lot about process, and I agree. As a lawyer, by training and profession, process is very important. We're governed by the rule of law. It is what distinguishes us from anarchy and chaos. But you know, there are ways and means of achieving things. We know, for example, there was a senator who's now before the court and resigned from the Senate. Not because there was any process in law that could force that person to resign, but he resigned. And Prime Minister, I've heard nothing from you to indicate what attempts have been made to have this individual remove himself from the Parliament. In fact, I haven't heard you condemn what he did. You've talked generally about the need to stop violence, but we've had no specific condemnation of his conduct, and it's unacceptable, Prime Minister. You talked about toxic masculinity, Madam Speaker, in your statement. The Prime Minister held forth on that. Well, that video was an example of the most toxic form of toxic masculinity. And the Parliament is not proposing to do anything about it in relation to that individual. And he's one of us. Come on. All these ladies in the Parliament, come on. We must be more proactive. And we must stand for the principle of the thing and show Jamaica that we are serious. We have anti-gang legislation that is critical. We have anti-gang legislation that is critical in the fight against violence generally. Madam Speaker, I was on a committee that reviewed the anti-gang legislation. I was very involved in the development of that legislation. That committee looked at it and made a lot of suggestions. Many of them had nothing to actually do with the legislation itself, but other pieces of legislation that require strengthening to make our overall law enforcement architecture more effective when it comes to investigating and prosecuting cases, serious cases. None of those recommendations have been brought here. Nothing has been done about it. It's taking too long. Murder and crime is the most serious problem the country has. And we don't see that seriousness reflected in the pace with which the government acts on these things. And I can assure you the Jamaican people are not happy about that. So, Madam Speaker, I didn't come knowing that the Prime Minister was going to make a statement. It wasn't on the agenda. But I thank him for his statement. A lot of what he said would have our support. We want to see the country a safe country. We want to see gender relations improved. We want to see the culture of violence, which is so ingrained in how we operate, how we parent children, how we deal with disputes. The restorative justice process was an attempt to bring an institutional framework to deal with that, to try and get healing to be part of the solution where relationships have breakdown. I was very involved in the development of that policy and the legislation that eventually came to Parliament brought by the Minister, Minister Chuck, and it has been passed. You know, I'd love to hear how it's doing. I'd love to have a regular report on how many people are being treated, for want of a better word, through the RJ process. I think we should do that quarterly. So fundamental is it to the same issue that the Prime Minister has addressed. Child diversion as well. We know that a lot of the time, this problem of violence doesn't start when people are adults. It starts from they're very young, and it manifests in adolescence often. The child diversion program is, again, an attempt to holistically address that and keep children who come into conflict with the law out of the court system, which is not a good place for children to be, and into a system which will try and address their needs and turn their lives around and make them productive citizens. I'd love to have a quarterly report on how we're doing with that as well. So, Prime Minister, don't worry. We will support positive action. And this Parliament has a responsibility for taking action in the areas where it can do so. But the government is the one that has to lead. The government has the state apparatus for developing legislation, for developing policy, and for bringing it to Parliament. And we're not happy with the way in which that has been working. We think that that could be considerably improved. And if we're going to address some of these issues, it has to be significantly improved. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to make these remarks.
just before you speak, Ms. Grange, thank you very much. I just crave your indulgence to let all members know that we have got the air conditioning unit up and running because we've all been fanning. Additionally, because this is a very important matter, and I want to thank the leader of opposition for rising. I just need, before we go a little further, because the PM has spoken and you have responded, and I need your guidance as the leader of the opposition. I understood you to be saying we must speak and we must, as a parliament, take action where we can. You will recall that last week I did say that the motion for suspension was appropriate but premature. Are you saying, I just want to know if this is the direction you wish us to go in. Are you saying that in matters where we have the type of behavior, the abuse against women, corruption, actions that this parliament should not tolerate and can take action? Are you saying, therefore, that we are not going to be hypocrites and we are not going to single out a particular action? We are going to look now as a full parliament, as a parliament that wants to be honest and straightforward. Members, that because if this is a cleansing, let us be total and honest. Am I hearing from the opposition that at this point, where we have matters that we can do something about and that are wrong and are so established to be wrong that we should do something? Yes. Is this what the opposition is saying? And I stand to facilitate and balance the scales. I will move along if this is where we are going as a parliament, because the country calls for us to be united. If there are matters for which there are criminal charges, which, to my mind, and not just to my trained mind, to the mind of every single Jamaican who can analyze, that are presently in our courts, that speaks to behavior that we will not tolerate, are we saying that any member so involved you are moving and you are prepared to move for a suspension of that? Is this what you're saying?
Madam Speaker.
It's a serious matter, and I'm merely trying to understand where we're going as a parliament and how, as a united front, we are going to deal with issues that are before us. Please, I really want to understand.
There is one issue before us today, or about to be put before us today, which is an issue which is an issue before the...
Members.
There's no other issue before us today.
Excuse me, members. Just a moment. Members on the government side, please allow the leader of the opposition to answer, and so that I can understand, and so that I can make a judgment call from where I sit. I would like to understand. Please allow him to speak.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I hope they will allow me to speak. There is one matter that we intend to bring forward today. We're bringing it forward today because it's a matter of national interest. It is a matter which has outraged many, many people around Jamaica. It is a matter for which there have been demonstrations in various places, and it's a matter which has resulted in the government changing their own caucus and issuing statements about taking an individual out of whatever positions that person has, even though he still remains a member of the governing party, as I understand it. So, Madam Speaker, that is before us today. I don't want to speak in generalities. I don't know really where you're going with this. But any member in here can bring a motion. If you have something to bring a motion about. So that is what I would say. I'm not speaking in generalities. Bring along, if you have things you want to complain about, bring it here and let us debate it. But we are bringing this here today, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Member, I'm going to ask the government members to allow everyone to have their chance to speak. And leader of the opposition, I am not angry. I'm not flustered. I want to understand. I will refer to my ruling last week, which is before this House. I said, as you correctly said, it was an appropriate motion, but it was premature. Morality and what is right and what is wrong, even as this country looks at us, because now remember, I am not talking of a motion. I'm asking for your direction based on your response. Morality does know time. Morality does not speak to the present, the past, or the future. Morality is something that we all grasp as a concept. Listen. And yes, we have before us a motion, an issue that is of national interest. But I want to say to you, there are other issues of great national interest. And a member on the opposition, please allow me to speak in silence. And I want to state clearly 2 points. One, which is important, and this came out very strongly in the meeting of the women on both sides. We must not appear to be hypocritical about what we say. And therefore, we cannot say that there are wrongs that face us that we sit with. But today, because there's just one motion on the table, we're going to close our eyes and deal with that. Because I want to say to you, in the public domain, as much as that video went viral, in the public domain, there are matters of national interest, right? That is in a far advanced stage in terms of criminal charges and moral issues that affect us as a country, as a people, that I believe if we come, they say he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. I say to you today, we have to decide as a parliament if we are going to come clean with it. It is, I listened carefully to the women this morning, and I want to applaud them. They want action. They did not ask for blood. They want action to start. What I hear is what we have as a parliament is action that has begun. And sometimes, in haste, we create more damage than we repair what is there. I sit here to balance the scales, and I want to urge us, as the women in Parliament did this morning. There is a call for unity. There is a call for action. There is nowhere space to indicate that there has been no action. There has been action. And as I say to you, again, we are going to have to examine that the suspension you have called for, we have not condoned. We have said actions that are seen, individual are wrong, but they have not reached the stage that charges in relation to corruption have reached. And therefore, it is unfair, it is hypocritical for us. It is hypocritical for us to want to travel in that direction and leave something that stands at a higher level. And that is where my thoughts are. Yes, no.
Madam Speaker.
I crave, yes, please,
go
ahead. He has not.
I crave your indulgence, Madam Speaker, just to say this. There is a generality of discussion taking place. As the leader of the opposition has said, there is a specific motion that was tabled last week. Well, we attempted to, I gave notice of it, and there was a ruling that I could go no further. Today, we intend to go further, and I will, at the appropriate stage, give the notice and to move the motion.
Madam Speaker,
go ahead.
Just to ensure that there is an understanding of the process. I think, Madam Speaker, in your general comments, you made broad references. The fact is there is no motion before this Honourable House to be considered on any matter to do with the behaviour of any member of this House at this time. An attempt might have been made last week, but that motion was not entertained, and therefore there is no motion. And then the appropriate time for a motion is not now. So later in the day, if the motion is approved by the Speaker as per the standing orders, then that motion could be accommodated. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. House Leader, where are we? Ms. Grange.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the interest of time, I'm going to In the interest of time, Madam Speaker, I will edit my presentation as I go along, because I recognize that we have two speakers in the sectoral debate that should have started sometime earlier. Madam Speaker, a few years ago, I raised the matter of gender-based violence in my address at my party's annual conference in front of a huge crowd. I urged a large gathering, Madam Speaker, at the national arena and those watching on television and the internet that as a society we needed to take a zero-tolerance approach to gender-based violence. I called for an end to the killing and beating of women. I said, don't abuse your woman. Don't abuse your man. Don't abuse your child. I also used the opportunity to discuss some of the initiatives that the government was putting into place to tackle the problem, including the establishment of national shelters for women and victims of gender-based violence. The shelter is up and running, and 2 others are being renovated as we speak. One in the east and one in the west of the island. I also spoke about the development of the No Excuse for Abuse campaign, which has been launched, and a new phase will be rolled out soon. At that time, Madam Speaker, I was chastised by a few gender activists for bringing that sort of discussion to a mass political event. I was convinced then, as I am today, that this matter of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, family violence, domestic violence must not be spoken of in hushed tones or only at certain places. We must speak of it everywhere, at our political rallies, at our staff meetings, at our church groups, at our women's meetings, at our men's meetings, in the nook and cranny of the island, and even in this honorable house. Research suggests that risk of violence is greatest in societies where the use of violence in many situations is a socially accepted norm. Therefore, in speaking out against violence, we can cultivate a new culture that is intolerant of all forms of violence in homes, in our institutions, in our workplaces, in our communities, everywhere. Madam Speaker, I note the statement from the Jamaica Constabulary Force regarding its investigation into a video that we all found difficult to watch. It is not acceptable that any man, whoever he is, should treat any woman in the manner displayed in that video. We must condemn him and his actions in the strongest sense, and we on this side, we do so. This weekend, we saw another video of gender-based violence in which a woman physically abused a man while urging him to hit her. In the video, the man displayed restraint, although when the woman licked him, she said, "Lick me now." And he restrained himself from doing so. So he clearly understood that there is no excuse for abuse. The actions of the woman are also completely unacceptable and must be condemned. And we all must be committed in this house that we will not be a part of a gender war. I urge any woman, or man for that matter, who needs help to leave a violent relationship to call us. They can call 876-553-0372. We will get to you, and we will ensure that you get to a safe place. And Madam Speaker, we have been assisting many. We have the call lines for the men and we have lines for the women. Feel free to call us. We are here to help you. That is a commitment of this government, and we will do it 24/7. Madam Speaker, I believe that every perpetrator of gender-based violence should be punished. But while the perpetrator should be punished, I do believe that every effort should be made to rehabilitate the perpetrator. We must change behavior in this country. So, Madam Speaker, today I will get straight to the point. I am happy to report that Cabinet has given its approval for the amendments to the Domestic Violence Act, which will serve to strengthen the law. The following is a list of amendments that we will pursue. A, we will include a definition of the term domestic violence in the Act. The definition will make clear that domestic violence is not only physical, but also psychological, emotional, and sexual, and may occur in situations where intimate images are exposed to inflict harm on a person, among other situations. B, we will expand the category of people who will be allowed to apply for protection orders on behalf of an abused person. C, we will also expand the conduct or behaviors that the court may prohibit the respondent from engaging in under a protection order. This will include a prohibition on taking possession of or damaging a property that the victim may have an interest in, as well as directing the perpetrator to pay compensation for monetary loss incurred by the victim as a direct result of conduct that amounted to domestic violence, and also directing the perpetrator to relinquish firearm license, firearm, or other weapon to the police, and other orders that the court may deem appropriate. We will also widen the threshold to be met in obtaining protection orders from the court to give greater protection to those who need the orders to keep abusers away. And E, we will increase the penalty for breach of a protection order. Madam Speaker and members, the current penalty is $10,000. We want to see the penalty move to $1 million or imprisonment for at least 1 year. This is serious business. Madam Speaker, I believe these amendments will go a far way in strengthening the law. However, I continue to make the point that laws will only be deterrents if people believe that they will be enforced. It is one thing for us to have harsh penalties, but to punish the perpetrators, we need convictions, and that requires people speaking up. Some perpetrators escape punishment because the victims decide, for whatever reason, not to pursue the matter. While we continue to encourage victims to pursue the matter under the law, we must not bash, blame, or second-guess victims in their decisions, which may include attempting to reconcile with the perpetrator. Madam Speaker, we have seen that many attempts to reconcile have ended with the worst possible outcome, but we have also seen that some perpetrators who have accepted that they have a problem and have sought help, which we have provided, have been successfully rehabilitated. So my ministry, through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, is implementing the Refocus Rehabilitation Program with the support of the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of National Security. Through the Refocus program, we will endeavor to reduce incidents of intimate partner violence by providing conflict resolution training